Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Outdoor Art Club presentation of Creating the Relationships You Want with the People Who Matter with licensed marriage and family therapist Gail Weiner. My name is Deborah Duck, and I'm working with fellow OAC Zoom team committee member Cherry Jones. For those of you who are not familiar with the Outdoor Art Club, we are a nonprofit women's organization founded in 1902. The club engages in civic, cultural, and charitable work in our community. In this past year, our organization's involvement has included financial support of the Canal Community Alliance and the San Francisco Marin Food Bank to support the many people involved or impacted by COVID-19. Members have also sewn, knitted, and distributed lap robes, shawls, bed socks, and pillows to the residents and clients of the Lifehouse Agency, San Rafael Health and Wellness Center, and the Redwoods. As you know, we are using the Zoom platform today. Zoom has two different functions, one for chat and one for Q&A. Please use Q&A to send your questions to our speaker, Gail Weiner, anytime during the program. She is reserving time at the end of her talk and welcomes your questions. As a side note, we have found that Zoom is not always perfect, and neither are we. Our team has worked hard to learn everything that Zoom has to offer, but things don't always work out quite the way we think they will. Please be patient with us. At this time, I'd like to introduce Lynn Fabian Lasner. Lynn is a member of the Outdoor Art Club, the Cultural Arts Committee Chair, and is the program chair of today's event.
So as Deborah said, I'm Lynn. I'm the head of the Cultural Arts Committee at the Outdoor Art Club in Mill Valley. And we are a team that works to find speakers and authors that we love, basically, that we think you'll love. We hope you'll love. And today is no exception. Today we have Gail Weiner. And Gail is someone who is an LMFT. She has over 3 decades of clinical experience in helping individuals and couples to thrive. She's been interviewed about relationships, couples, dating on Voice America and numerous podcasts. She writes as a guest expert for First Date Stories. She's taught human sexuality at the graduate level. She speaks widely on dating and couples issues throughout Northern California. Besides her psychotherapy practice with individuals and couples, Gail has created an ongoing empowered dating group, which, by the way, has openings if anyone is interested in joining. All you have to do is go to datewisenow.com is her site, and you can sign up for that. In the last decade, she's developed this DateWise, which is a unique approach for women to create lasting love at any age. The DateWise process identifies temperament and attachment needs, and she'll talk more about attachment needs during this presentation. It's really interesting. It's not only interesting, but you actually will leave this Zoom presentation with practical tips that you can use to enhance your own relationships. So she's very specific about things, and she has some wonderful information. She allows clients to risk authentic connection. That is her focus. DateWise combines the depth and precision of therapy with targeted behavioral practice. Women in her groups learn to craft memorable online profiles, confidently spot their best matches, and negotiate conflict with skill, which is, again, a lot of what we'll be talking about today. And I should say the really cool thing about Gail, among many other things, because I love her and I love her work, is that she's actually offering everyone who's attending this webinar a complimentary consult. If you go to her website at datewisenow.com, you can sign up and she'll give you her time for free. You can talk to her about any relationship conflict you'd like to talk about, or any issue, or anything that has to do with relationships. So use that if you are so inclined, for sure. Without further introduction, here's Gail Weiner.
There we go. Now you can see me and hear me. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Um, just a heads up, our time together today is going to be old-fashioned and slide-free, as I hope befits a conversation about relationships. You'll have our faces and our conversation and all the images your own fertile imagination kicks up as we share ways to nourish your connectedness. We'll talk a lot about romantic relationships, uh, a lot about the differences between men and women, but the principles and practices apply to just about any bond where you're emotionally invested. We'll cover some familiar ground, and though I can't see you and don't yet know you, I do know that this is likely to be a sophisticated audience, so you might recognize some of the ideas I'll be sharing: attachment, blue zones, emotional bidding, and how to be a splendid and successful fighter, a love warrior, let's call it, with the ones you love. But to paraphrase T.S. Eliot, the goal here is that even though some of these ideas might be familiar, at the end of our exploring, we'll arrive where we started, but truly know it for the first time. That's my intention. So I'd like to start by sharing an idea that's crystallized for me as I have been focusing on women's intimate lives, that I think might help you approach your own dilemmas, romantic or not, with new purpose. So we'll take a few minutes on this bigger picture, and then Lynn and I will get into conversation with more context and practices to use with the people who matter most. Okay, our foundational idea is that the self, yours and mine, is originally formed in relation to our earliest caregivers. So this is a core insight from attachment theory with lots of big deal implications. What I've come to see in my clinical experience, though, is how we can actually remake that self or adjust that self inherited from our formative early experience by taking an active role in cultivating our own emotional life, our own emotional environment. So this is reversing our position of childhood, where we are primarily the recipients. We interact too, of course, but primarily we're the recipients of the emotional environment of our family and the unconscious and conscious needs of the people around us. And so this is a sort of taking back the reins of the formation of your own self in adulthood in a way that I find and my clients find incredibly empowering. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So how do you do it? In general terms, by targeting specific changes in how you relate that are designed to evoke a new set of responses from the significant people in your life. They're in the position, by the way they respond to us, to confirm uh, a different sense of self than the one that we grew up with. I mean, particularly, obviously, that's something that you are interested in if the emotional environment of your early life distorted or limited your capacity to be your authentic self. So these specific changes are really key in how you relate that are designed to evoke the new responses. So that's one. Two, intentionally choosing the people who can give you that kind of confirming response for your emerging self. And when I work with women around dating issues, this is a really big deal in terms of what kind of partners you choose. Um, so the paradox is we're both conditioned and free. We're deeply shaped by our childhood, but also able to sculpt relationships now to repair and reshape us into the selves we most want to be. And to me, that's the stealth agenda of all relationships, and the promise of them. Um, of course, having great relationships there are plenty of rewards in that are obvious to everyone. We'll talk about some of the benefits that maybe aren't so obvious. But again, the idea is these relationships that you develop consciously and the interactions that you hone and refine and master are also ways to overthrow earlier notions of who you are, what you deserve, what you can expect from others, what you have to give, and what is the cost for what you need to get. So this conscious experimentation positions you as both the artist and the material of your own life and unleashes a profound experience of creativity and mastery. And that's really what my work with people is all about. And I hope to give you some insight into how that might work for you today. So let's give it back to Lynn, one of my favorite people to talk to. She's been kind enough to be here with me to ask her generative questions. And I'll hand it over back to you, Lynn.
Thanks, Gail. So very, very basic question, especially with what we read in the past few years about people choosing more and more to be single and not to be in relationship, et cetera, et cetera. Just why are relationships so important to humans?
Yeah, well, it's in our DNA. You know, we're wired for connection. We're designed to evolve and can only evolve fully into a separate self through original attachments to caregivers. So, because we're the most undeveloped of all primates when we're born, we are dependent on other people for wave after wave after wave of our own developmental process, which means that our reliance on them shapes our identity and expectations. Um, in a very, very fundamental way. We begin inside somebody else's body, sharing blood, nutrients, and the chemical changes that are part of our mother's emotional life. We're designed to be fed directly from her body in utero, and once we're out, our nervous systems are entrained to our mothers once we're born, our very heartbeats gaining stability and strength by being near the adult's mature, established rhythm. So you mothers who are here today might recall that a newborn's vision is clear only as far as the distance between your eyes and your breast. So that extended mutual gazing that goes on during breastfeeding is thought to be both a part of the formation of the self, the experience of being seen by a beloved and loving other, at the same time that you are taking in the physical nourishment that's crucial for survival. So they're intertwined and they both are equally necessary. Um, Attachment theorists think our first identity is a kind of amalgam. We don't even exist to ourselves as a me at first. We are a mommy me. That's the identity. In the same way that we don't exist physically separate from their care. It's not possible for babies to be self-sufficient. Similarly, we don't even have a concept of self apart from her. And that interpenetration with another continues throughout our lives in different ways. So think of the extended gazing of new lovers, the exquisite sensitivity to their absence, the sense of being restored to your full self when they return, just for starters. And this need for others functions at a group level too. It's commonplace to say humans are social creatures, and of course we are. But consider for a moment that being shunned from a group by a group that you had been part of creates a trauma similar to that trauma experienced by victims of psychological torture. It is a form of psychological torture to be shunned by the group to which you belong. And some cultures are better at recognizing this deep, deep interdependence than others are. So let's take the Zulu for a moment as a window. They have a tribal culture, which also means a culture where face-to-face interaction, relationships, interdependence for survival, and mutual support are key. Do they say, "Hi, how are you?" with an expected and empty, "Fine"? No, 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 no. Here's what they do. When they meet someone, the first person says, I see you. And the reply is, I am here. To me, this exchange is an affirmation with one person saying, I recognize you, your existence matters to me. And the reply is, I am present with you. To me, that's like, I am available to you. The interrelatedness is acknowledged fully as the starting point of anything else that will come after. And just take for a moment a few ways that the absence of intimacy affects us. Recent study by Cigna Insurance, 53% of Americans do not have meaningful interactions with another person on a daily basis. And this was pre-COVID. The physical impact of having no friends is as damaging to your health as being a smoker. And after divorce, suicide rates go up, especially for men who are 9 times more likely to kill themselves than had they been married.
Oh my goodness, those are sobering. Wow. So as we hear those statistics are enlightening and frightening. So since the United States isn't necessarily set up as a whole in wonderful ways for nurturing and getting this social interaction that makes us live longer, um, what are some of the cultures around the world? You mentioned that beautiful greeting by the Zulus. What other cultures have succeeded at this task?
Yeah, well, people might be familiar with the blue zones, the research into these areas in the world where people have a very high quality of life and live significantly longer than average. Lots of people making it to be 100 years old or more, with a fraction of the typical diseases you find in the developed world. Places like Sardinia, Okinawa, Loma Linda, California. But what we're concerned with today is what characterizes the social and emotional life of blue zones. And possibly not a surprise, they prioritize family, they maintain lifelong friendships, and they stay socially engaged in their communities.
Huh. So one is in California. That's interesting. Hmm. So what that brings up for me is that I was thinking as you were talking, I used to live in the middle of a city in the East Coast. I used to live in the middle of Philadelphia, and I was in an active arts community, and people dropped over for dinner, and conversations often went into the night, and there were just always people around because it was that kind of a culture. When I moved to the West Coast in the mid 90s, not so much. You know, people schedule hikes together. Everything was more planned. It was just a different culture, basically. And I found the West so good for nurturing freedom and inner expansion, enlightenment, but that social piece was never really fulfilled for me. I don't know if others feel like this or not. So I would like to know right here and right now in this culture, and for many of us in this Northern California culture, um, how can we create that unity and community in our lives?
Yeah, right. Really, really important question. And that distinction between sort of freedom and expansion and belonging and community. And that corresponds with two impulses that we have as humans, one for uh, self expression and separateness, and one for affiliation and connection. They're both there. They're both part of being a healthy human being. For women in particular, it can feel like a conflict to have both of those things. You know, we're given messages by the culture and sometimes by our families that we're the ones who are supposed to take care of affiliation, and we have certain talents for that. But you know, obviously, it's important to find a way to embrace both aspects. And so in terms of affiliation, yeah, it's got to be intentional. because the culture often doesn't provide it easily. It gets harder as you get older, typically, as your work communities and communities that were involved in being a parent of children fall away. And so if you want the rewards, you have to make it a priority. So some things you could do what you love, but do it in group settings. And do it in settings that have regular meetings. So it's built in to have an opportunity to create and deepen relationships over time. I would say choose some activities where deeper conversation and or interdependence is built in to the activity. And then intensify your current connections. Pay attention as opposed to taking for granted. So you see people more often, do different activities, make it, make it scheduled and regular, expand into sharing new parts of your lives that you haven't before, potentially creative work, writing, joint projects, find ways to make the connection, pulse, alive, vital.
Yes, thank you. Um, so in your practice of working with people for over 30 years, could you tell us what seem to be some of the biggest challenges for women and men maintaining close ties with their partners?
Really big topic. I want to take a minute to try to paint, step back and paint I don't know, bigger picture maybe. Few theories that seem useful to start with that highlight some differences in communication style, in hormonal responses to threat, and how our brains are wired. So let's start with evolutionary psychology, which posits that there may be a difference in men's and women's communication style that is a legacy of our time as hunter-gatherers, in which men were understood to be hunting in small groups where you had to be quiet and stealthy, right? So you wouldn't scare the game away. Whatever speaking was done was short, it was action oriented and task centered. And typically it's thought there was a hierarchy because in a sort of military situation like this, where you have to move quickly and make a decision, one decision for the whole group, like now, there's a hierarchy. One person is in charge of that. So these are all dynamics that we've seen in male communication, even today. And for women who were understood to be the primary gatherers of food, they were also there with the children, raising up the next generation. They were able to talk in a more leisurely way about a variety of things while they were doing their task. And this difference in the communication styles, um, there's a suggestion that that may be reinforced by recent brain scanning that we've been able to do, uh, showing the difference between male and female brains. So men's brains have a lot more interconnectivity within the left and within the right hemispheres, and women have much more interconnectivity between the left and the right. And so um, men are seen as compartmentalizing more and having more separation between their thinking and their feeling functions, and also between thinking, feeling, and verbally processing. Whereas for women, these things are densely connected. These functions of the brain are densely connected with neural pathways. And so just a little tip, if you're trying to have a conversation with a man about a conflict situation and he needs a little time to go by himself and think about it before he can tell you how he thinks and feels, and before he can put it into words, he might be just reporting the facts, ma'am. It might not be that he's avoiding or conflict averse or spaced out. It really might just be an accurate description of what's needed for him to find what's true for him. And in a number of research projects, men have said, yes, this helps me the most when I need to think about something where there's conflict, to process it on my own and then come back later. One final thing, there's a difference between how men and women's bodies react to stress. You've all heard of the fight and flight response, which has to do with the surge of adrenaline that comes up when you think or feel that you're being threatened. And it's quite difficult to think clearly when you're suffused with adrenaline, and the instinct is to see the other as the enemy. Whereas for women, studies have shown there's a surge of oxytocin, not as much adrenaline, and oxytocin is the bonding hormone. And the phrase is that women tend and befriend under stress, that they try to turn the enemy into a friend. And so as a woman, if you're trying to work with a man around a conflict situation, you would be well served to do everything you can, and we'll talk about some ways how to reduce the likelihood that they will experience the conversation as a threat.
Huh, that's fascinating. I love that that is now documented and brings that's amazing and very interesting. Um, so, what can you tell us about um, some good ways to manage conflict, some ways to handle our emotions when we're in the middle of an argument and we're angry as hell and we don't want to, use any of our tools that we have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you suggest generally for managing our emotional states in conversation and arguments?
Could I back up a little bit and just talk about sort of prevention? Kind of there's sort of what do I want to say? Sort of relationship management in general, and then there's moments of conflict, and they're obviously related. So just to say, uh, first, in those times of peace, you want to be doing everything you can to maximize trust and responsiveness, and then inevitably conflict will arise in the happiest couples and the best situations. And of course, the goal there is to minimize the wounding and repair any loss of trust. As well, of course, in terms of content, you want to resolve the problem because as you do all of those things, you create long-term stability for the relationship. So I just want to say, be alert to the preventative medicine of building the relationship in times of peace. And let me talk a little bit about how you do that based on John Gottman's research, which is quite well known. And some of you might be familiar. I want to pick out a few of the things I think are the big takeaways here. So number one, oh, sorry. Just to say, if you don't know Gottman's research, he looked at a number of newlywed couples. They were wired and measured every aspect of their physiology and their body language and tone of voice, and actual content of communication was measured. And then they looked at these couples 6 years later, who was still happy and together, which couples had divorced. So here are the takeaways. The couples who were still happy um, were their relationships had a huge amount of laughter and playfulness, which is crucial for building trust. And they do much, much better under stress with that kind of background of playful, humorous connection. In the midst of a fight, you have a better chance of viewing your partner positively when you bring some humor into the exchange. Um, as we talked about before, this also helps with the um, fight or flight response. Secondly, wholeheartedly celebrating each other's achievements bonds you even more than sharing sadness or being empathic with someone's pain. So of course, yes, of course you're going to show empathy for their pain. It creates trust, but joining around happy moments is even more powerful. And this, of course, applies to all relationships. It's super important for kids to have this kind of celebration of their achievements and their opportunities to do it, of course, with friends and colleagues. So look for moments to celebrate and really milk them for all they're worth. It's a really fun way to pay attention in your daily life, is to look for moments of celebration. A third insight from Gottman: happy and lasting couples have a ratio of positive to critical comments that is 5 positive to 1 complaint. So positive, 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 and then you have built enough buffer that you can say, aha, I'm having a problem with blah, blah, blah. And the difference between a complaint and a criticism is the complaint is about a situation. The criticism makes the person the problem. So keep the problem as the situation or circumstance and not the person. That is how you will have the most success. And then once you do that, 5 more positives. Obviously, I'm not talking about they all have to be in the next 10 minutes or half an hour, but in general, think about the level of reassurance we sensitive creatures need to know that we continue to be valued by the other. And then finally, the last vitamin for your bond is full-bodied, physically and vocally expressive responses create the most powerful experience of being loved, and what you get in return from your partner or the other person you're relating to, interest, affection, support, and empathy, all of it gets raised, and you are then on the receiving end of all of that.
Gail, I remember when we spoke about this a little earlier, and you were comparing that reaction as the same reaction as when a baby or a toddler comes into a room, or a puppy comes into the room, that kind of full-bodied hi.
Right, right,
I love
right. Where you're communicating kind of with your energy primarily. Yeah.
that. And so you were talking about Gottman,
Yeah,
and
and emotional bidding.
yes, he's the one who talked about emotional bidding.
Right, right.
Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. So I love emotional bidding because it's so easy. Anybody can do it. You can do it anytime. And it's the smallest currency of emotional exchange. And it's like pennies constantly going back and forth. And it's basically an attempt at emotional connection, verbal, nonverbal, um, and a grunt, a sigh, a little movement of the head, to a small question, huh? What do you mean? Anything like that, that is an attempt to connect or respond to a connection. These are bids. And in couples that are happy, 6 years later, they made 100 bids in 10 minutes. So this is just constant. It's almost like breathing when both parties are present and available to each other. For the couples who ended up divorced, they only responded to, I'm sorry, 100 bids in 10 minutes. I don't have that fact, that statistic right here, but they made many fewer bids than the couples who were happy. And then in terms of turning toward the bid, and we'll talk about what that is in a bit, but basically responding in a generally positive way, the happy couples turn toward each other 9 out of 10 times. So almost always in a happy couple, the partner will respond. Um, and in the couples who divorced, it was 3 out of 10 times. So you can see how turning toward the bid leads to a cycle of more bidding and responding, and the negative or absent response leads to less bidding. So there are fewer chances to turn toward, and the bond disintegrates. So you're either developing a positive feedback loop or a negative feedback loop most of the time. And it's also, the more you do that, the better the conflict moments go, because the reassurance of that bond is so much stronger.
So
Um,
this is about investing in your relationship all the time.
yeah, right. But in small ways, small, 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 natural, easy. You were born to do this if you can bring yourself to the moment.
That's great. So you've been talking about romantic relationships. Um, I would imagine that this works similarly with platonic relationships, relationships with our kids, now, relationships with our kids, and relationships with our friends. I would imagine that bidding is a major factor in those relationships as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you incorporate bidding as a regular part of the way you intend to connect with people, you will form friendships more easily as an adult. Siblings stay closer in adulthood, and at work it improves morale, productivity, and increases collaboration.
So mostly it's always when you talk about a bid, you really mean things that are as simple as I'm talking to you right now and I just say, Gail. So,
Yes.
so little pieces of interest
Yeah,
on
you
the
moved forward, you smiled, you tilted your head, you changed the tone of your voice. It was a little more lively, a little more emotionally inflected. I mean, not everyone has to have the same interpersonal style. Of course, there's room for you to be who you are. So in a way that's authentic for you, you know, just think about the goal, basically.
thank you. And so I asked you a question earlier about, when we get really angry, what do we do? Um, Tell me, I think maybe I didn't add in that question when it's the last thing we want to do to bid, to make a bid. Um, what can we do? What are some concrete steps to take?
Yeah, right. So as always, there's the what are you doing preventatively? And then what do you do in the moment of
In the moment?
pressure,
Yeah.
right? So having the capacity to manage your own emotional state is hugely valuable. And there are a lot of things that help with that. Obviously, meditation practice is really useful. But there are also lots and lots of other self-soothing techniques, and I'll give you two quick ones for today. The first is the 90-second rule, and that is an acknowledgement that the surge of chemicals that come through us when we feel a strong emotion lasts about 90 seconds. Like think of it as sediment in a water glass and let it settle to the bottom. There we go. Let it settle to the bottom. And so basically breathe deeply and allow yourself to wait it out. Don't attach too much to the emotion as being a sign of truth necessarily. Give it a little time. And to help soothe yourself in that moment, if the waiting and the deep breathing wasn't enough, picture someone who loves and accepts you, picture their face, then hear their voice greeting you in a loving way, and then feel as they come close and embrace you fully in a hug, and let yourself breathe that in. These are all things, the visual link, the auditory link, the kinesthetic link, these downshift your parasympathetic nervous system and allow you to return to a baseline relatively quickly. And the more you do this when you're not in the midst of stress, the more quickly you can tune into it and move yourself back to that state of readiness to talk about the conflict. Um, and then if none of that is working, or even if it does, but not quite enough, or if your partner needs something else, there's the 20-minute rule. It's kind of famous. Basically, if you or your partner is flooded, agree to pull away from the conversation for 20 minutes. Don't plan your response, your next line of attack. Actually really distract yourself with something pleasant, potentially rhythmic movement, coloring, music, reading, but let your body again return to baseline. And then try again. And if that doesn't work, agree to meet within 24 hours to complete the conversation. But again, the more productively and calmly the conversation can happen, the safer both parties will feel, the more motivated they'll be to bring up difficult issues, which then allows for the issues to actually get resolved, which then creates a happier, stable, and more trusting relationship. Again, we're talking about building the positive feedback loop that creates more and more trust, even in moments of conflict.
So good and concrete. Thank you.
Pleasure.
How about leaning away from bids? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, you can lean against the bid, turn against the bid, or turn away from the bid. So turning against a bid these are all the mean behaviors that we've all experienced or done or seen: belligerent, contradicting, domineering, critical, defensive, contemptuous. There are lots of flavors. The dynamic when one partner is hostile is eventually the other partner will withdraw, and that leads over time to the end of the relationship. But actually, even more damaging than turning against a bid is turning away from a bid. And this harkens back to our discussion of attachment earlier on, which is when you turned away from, again, it's that experience of in that moment, you are being shunned, you don't exist for the other person. They are not acknowledging your being. And again, since we're so deeply interdependent for our sense of self on other people, even as adults, even as healthy, secure adults, what happens is when the other person turns away, that's the quickest path to divorce. And you know, uh, even in good relationships, people rarely will rebid after the first turning away. 90% of the time, you get one chance. Um, yeah, I mean, again, if you turn away, most people won't try again. So one slight wrinkle in this is that, again, because of the compartmentalization, men tend to turn away more mindlessly than women do. Usually if a woman turns away, she means it. It's because she's mad. But a man can be doing it without necessarily being hostile. So, the tip is check in and find out what might be going on there. And just one last thing. Um, I really love the principle of Kaizen applied to relationships. And what I mean by that, this is a Japanese management principle that was developed in the years after World War II that turned Japan into, the preeminent manufacturing giant of the world. But basically the idea was, what's one small thing that could be improved, and focus on that one small thing, but you have to practice it consistently. So every day trying this one new thing to improve. And my advice is make it something that is a little scary, but not so risky that it's unmanageable. So look for that sweet spot. What's your cutting edge? How can you stretch your capacity a little more and practice it consistently over and over and over again, noticing what's the feedback? How can you shift it? Do you need to try it a different way? Basically, again, you are your own creative project in terms of developing mastery, which again is a very, I think, exciting and empowering approach to take toward relationship and your life in general.
I love that. Little pieces.
Yeah.
And consistency. Because you've worked so much with a focus on women and women's studies and women's clients and women's dating in midlife. Can you give an example of a common problem that is specific to women that comes up a lot in your sessions, in your psychotherapy practice and your groups, and how you work with women to resolve that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's one that I find quite common. Um, is many clients are afraid to bring up a problem that they're having with somebody because they think of it as a choice between do they want a peaceful relationship where they're sort of willing to suffer a little bit, but it's really worth it because they're keeping the peace, or do they want conflict? But actually, I think that's a false way of understanding the issue. Um, if you are upset about something, there's already conflict in the relationship. It just hasn't been spoken out loud yet. It can be experienced energetically by the other person, but it's not the difference between peace and conflict. It's the difference between internalized conflict that remains unresolved and the possibility of making it an interpersonal dynamic with the potential to uh, both create a practical solution that works for both of you and to have an opportunity to remake the self, because the response you get to your need, because you're skillful in presenting it and because you've chosen someone who's well suited to give you a confirming response, helps to remake your sense of self. So again, there are always, in my mind, at least two agenda items there. There's the overt conflict, which is the overt issue. What's the conflict about and how do you resolve it? And then there's the uh, deeper agenda, which I mentioned before, which is the opportunity to develop another experience of your own capacity for intimacy.
I like that concept of whether you're trying to keep the peace or acknowledging or not what's going on, it's there.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. I mean, meaning, and just one other quick thing, if obviously the more you hold it, if you hold it in, it gets bigger and bigger and it finally erupts. And by that point, you're convinced that the other person is an enemy, probably don't care about you. They won't listen. They can't change. It's so easy to build up the case in your own mind the longer you wait to bring something up. Or you handle the intensity of the feeling by numbing, distancing, and getting so disengaged that it becomes hard to walk over that bridge back to the other person again. But you have to have a sense of being able to do it successfully, which is why it's helpful to practice these things in small doses. There are quite a few questions I see.
Yeah.
So I have more to say about how to talk in a way that reduces defensiveness. But why don't we take some questions?
Okay.
Um,
Let me take a
so
look.
people have a chance to get some responses.
Oh, very interesting. Um, we have two questions that are about bids.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to ask you both of them, and you can then answer both of them. Someone asks, is turning toward literal?
It
Okay.
certainly can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Right? A smile, raising your eyebrows, huh? Or, a couple of words. You can do that turning toward a person, which is nice, but you don't have to. Really, any level of intensity and response to the bid, as long as it's turning toward, it counts.
I love it because you just answered the second question about bids. And someone said, are bids primarily words or are they physical? And you've said both. Yeah. So let's see what else.
Anybody who put a question in the chat, we're just looking at the Q&A section right now. So please move it over to the Q&A section so we can find your question.
Someone says, how can we maintain a healthy, happy relationship with our partner when COVID requires that we maintain distance?
Oh, if you're not in a bubble, if you're not in a COVID bubble, wow, yes. Well, I like Zoom.
You like
um, because you get to look at people's faces and hear each other's voices. And you're not halfway covered with a mask, but people have been pretty inventive, meeting in parking lots with windows halfway open,
Yeah.
uh, wearing masks, or taking walks, socially distanced walks with masks on. But you're right, it's very, very, very challenging. Um, really, words and images, what can you do with them? I think there's a call for a resurgence of the love letter.
Hmm, what a nice thought. Um, Someone asks, what is your biggest dating tip for women over 60?
Oh, come to my empowered dating group. Join my empowered dating group. It's for women 40 and up, and there are tons and tons of things we talk about there. And I don't mean to put you off. Happy to have a consult with you about it. Is there a number one tip? I would say in terms of your own experience of yourself, um, sort of harvest your own riches before you begin again. And by that, I mean, it's easy to think, oh, I'm too old for this. I won't be chosen. Um, but think rather about the incredible riches that you are now capable of bringing to a relationship, and really like list them, have your friends tell you about them, compare yourself now to 20 or 30 years ago, and have your own I really want to say the riches and gifts, the cornucopia that you bring to a relationship now that wouldn't have been possible for you when you were younger, as the first thought as you go out into the dating world.
Hmm, great advice. Okay, someone says, from what you say, there seems to be no repair to a relationship when one or the group turns away. How does this translate in a work, purely professional relationship?
Mm. Okay, let me maybe clarify what I meant. When I say 90% of the time someone doesn't turn back if their bid is turned away from, I just mean in that moment. I don't mean in terms of the relationship, they will stop bidding forever. I just mean that one particular bid is unlikely to be repeated if it's turned away from. So
Yeah.
you will, and you do, we all do, keep bidding because it's essential to our experience of, to a positive experience of being alive. So we will continue bidding. We just don't want, we just mostly won't make that same bid again.
Okay, thank you. That's such a good clarification because I think some of us were going like, one turn.
Yeah, sorry. No, that's really drastic and not true. Sorry about that.
Um, how about a mom asks you how she can prepare her young daughter for relationships which are outside the family? She said she's digesting the way which we relate differently today in the Bay Area. And she's wondering if you have some tips on that for her daughter, for teaching her daughter.
Do we know how old? Do we know how old this daughter is?
We don't
Um,
pick an age.
oh, I would say um, saying yes and saying no, and really meaning both of them, and helping her um, take a quiet moment and notice how she feels and whether she's feeling a yes or a no,
Mm,
and
good.
then saying it very clearly.
Love that.
Very simple. I'm thinking somebody who's 4 or 5.
Yeah. And carried on, really, throughout the
Yeah.
ages. Um, are you aware of any studies or do you have any thoughts about how technology has interfered with bids?
Really good questions. The clients I have who are, for example, dating, um, often will miss or misconstrue bids when they're made in writing, and people, I think, are generally speaking, mm, it's a little less instinctive to write to write a bid well, as opposed to do it naturally in the course of interaction. So I would say, I mean, I teach people specific things about how to respond in text and in email, but I would say try to move relatively quickly into an actual conversation. You know, we are animals, we are built physiologically in ways, we have, you know, a history of however many thousands and thousands and thousands of years as an animal species. Get into the place where you can relate to each other, at least by having each other's voice and image, and spend less preliminary time on text and emails.
Perfect. And by the way, the daughter asked about was 3.
Okay.
So you intuitively picked the right age and stage of development. Um, thank you. I think I'm going to check one more time, but yeah, we're almost getting toward the end, so we've stopped the questions. Um, Gail, you have said that you will take a look at the Q&A box, and if there are questions that are unanswered, you're happy to answer them.
And potentially the chat box, if I can have access to that, happy to answer if there were some questions there that didn't get over to Q&A.
Okay, great. And I just want to remind everyone that Gail, who is full of incredible insights and laser wisdom at all times, according to me, is available at datewisenow.com, right, Gail? And you,
Yes.
yes, you can go there, and she is offering a complimentary consultation with her. Just sign up on her site. So that's kind of amazing. Um, is there anything else you would like to say in closing, Gail?
Um, It's just been a pleasure. I wish we could be face to face, given everything, you know, we've talked about today. It's a little strange to have you behind the, you know, the green dot up there, but I hope that I get the opportunity to meet you. I would love to help you with any issues that where you think it might be wonderful to have an expert in your corner, at least for an hour and possibly longer. Thank you so much for coming today. And thank you, Lynn and OAC, for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really wonderful.
Pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Gail. So thank you, everyone who's come today. You may not have been here before, but we would love, love, love to have you come back. Most Thursdays, many Thursdays, usually a couple a month at least, we offer these free presentations to the public. As I said earlier, we really try to find people who are authors, speakers, people who have something to say that we think will really enrich your lives and our lives. So I'd love to see you come back, and I'm going to tell you about just the next 2 presentations so you have an idea of what's coming up. Let's see, we have What's the Big Idea? A look at understanding and appreciating the art of our time, including the genesis of conceptual art, with Julie Charles of SF MoMA. That's next Thursday, February 25th at 1 p.m., same as this one. And then on March 4th, also at 1 p.m., also a Thursday, we have You Can Garden for Life, Smarter, Not Harder, and Well into Old Age if you create your own adaptive gardening sustainability plan. We're meeting here with author and motivational speaker Toni Gattoni, and she will show us how to construct our own plan. So many more to come. I hope to see you again and again, and enjoy your weekend, everyone. Bye.